A couple of weeks ago, I made a video on what I felt Far Cry New Dawn did right, so it's only natural that we now talk about some of the major cons with this game and the things it got wrong. New Dawn was of course more of a spin-off game for Far Cry 5 rather than a true sequel, and many thought it should have been released as a DLC. I wouldn't go that far, but it's definitely nowhere near as large as most Far Cry games. It didn't offer tons of new features or content. But hey, at least it wasn't priced at the full $60 on release. But even so, New Dawn still made some odd changes and additions to the Far Cry formula and from Far Cry 5. Some of them worked, most of them didn't, but I understand they were trying to give a more unique Far Cry experience so people don't just call it a DLC, which it kind of got called anyways. One of the big things they added, and unnecessarily in my opinion, were the RPG mechanics. This game came out around the time where Ubisoft was effectively making all of their games with these RPG mechanics. They were being brought into Assassin's Creed, Ghost Recon with Breakpoint, and they even were supposed to be prevalent in Watch Dogs Legion before Ubisoft got such bad backlash from the community in the other games they implemented these mechanics in that they delayed Watch Dogs Legion and stripped all that stuff out. But quite unfortunately, even Far Cry New Dawn got the RPG mechanics, which were completely unnecessary in my opinion. Having health bars and damage numbers kills the immersion for me. Luckily you can turn the HUD off, but there's other things you can't turn off, like damage sponge enemies with armor, a leveling system, and different ranks and tiers of weaponry and vehicles. Again, all of that is just not needed in Far Cry, and it's honestly one of, if not my biggest issues with New Dawn in general. Another issue I found very noticeable is there's absolutely no weapon customization outside of just upgrading the damage a weapon does. You can't change the attachments or even the skins. Don't get me wrong, New Dawn has some very cool creative weapons that you can craft, but I don't like that you can't customize them at all. Weapon customization has been a staple in Far Cry for a while now, so this felt like a huge step back. And it especially sucks since a lot of the scopes and sights on the weapons are too big and clunky, making them annoying to aim with. Again, the weapons are fun, but even more choice and freedom with customization, just like Far Cry 5, would have made it so much better. Another issue I have, and this is a little more minor but still very frustrating, is with the stealth detection. The enemies in this game hear absolutely everything, it feels like. You know how in most stealth and Far Cry games, using a suppressed weapon to take out enemies will be silent? Well, in this game, it's almost too realistic, where it feels like every time you shoot someone with a suppressed gun, or even with a bow and arrow, everyone within a 3-mile radius can hear it. Okay, that's an exaggeration, but at least a few people within an outpost. The amount of times I've heard, "Turn off the music," after I silently take out an enemy where nobody should have heard anything is absurd. Enemies get into the alerted state very easily and start searching for you quickly. I understand the argument that it may feel more realistic, but it's too much. It's a game and it makes stealth very frustrating. Also, it's worth mentioning once you get weapons crazy upgraded in this game, it makes stealth kind of irrelevant since you can just one-shot everybody. Now, moving on to the story, for me, everything outside of the stuff with Joseph Seed was pretty bland and forgettable, including the main antagonists of the game, Mickey and Lou. They feel like cartoon villains to me, and it's like the game wanted you to be scared and intimidated by them, but they just weren't scary in the least. If anything, they were boring, especially when you compare them to so many of the great villains in the Far Cry series. Mickey and Lou completely pale in comparison. They tried to give them some backstory and motivation, but it really doesn't land, and the whole thing feels rushed since it's not a very long story. Easily some of the most forgettable antagonists in Far Cry for me. That also extends to our main character, the security captain. Obviously another mute protagonist just like Far Cry 5, and there's not really anything to this character. I guess the security captain is supposed to be the chosen one by getting these powers from Joseph Seed. I know some people like the mute protagonists. They work well in other games, but I always preferred a voiced main character in Far Cry, especially since they are such narrative narrative-heavy games. But I can understand the appeal of just playing as this blank slate, mass-murdering machine, living out a ridiculous power fantasy. But I mean, you could do that with a voiced character too. Just look at Rex Power Cult.
That never gets old.
At least the deputy from Far Cry 5 has an interesting story at the end, and then becomes Joseph's judge in New Dawn, but then this random security captain comes in and just becomes the chosen one, I guess. There's just no way to connect with this character. I actually think it could have been really cool if we played as the deputy slash judge instead, but that's just me. And that leads to, of course, one of the game's general flaws, which is just its length. It's weird, it's not quite small enough to call it a DLC, although I suppose it could have just been a major expansion for Far Cry 5, but it probably wouldn't get as many sales that way, knowing how Ubisoft thinks. But as a standalone game, it just doesn't offer much substance, whether that's in the short-lived, rushed main story of forgettable characters, the small fraction of Hope County from Far Cry 5, and the limited number of outposts and different things to do. I like to compare this game to Primal because they're both standalone, sort of spin-off games that were meant to serve as games in between the main entries. However, Primal, while it's similar in length, it does something completely different and unique. It goes way back in time, you get to use all sorts of new weapons, it's only bows, spears, melee weapons, it has a gorgeous world, and new systems with an emphasis on survival. Even look at Blood Dragon, which is a DLC and significantly shorter, but it's so unique and creative. New Dawn tries to do what Blood Dragon and Primal did, but the way they went about it felt wrong, especially with these RPG mechanics, and stripping out a lot of what people liked from even Far Cry 5. Don't get the wrong idea, I don't hate Far Cry New Dawn. If you saw my video on what it did right, there's quite a few things I like about it. It is still my least favorite Far Cry game, but it's still tolerable for me, and I didn't have a terrible experience with it. But what they were going for and the style just doesn't fit well with Far Cry, or at least in my opinion. Feel free to let me know down in the comments what you feel Far Cry New Dawn got right or wrong, and where the game ranks in the series for you. I'll leave a link in the description to my video on what the game did right if you'd like to check that out as well. If you enjoyed the video, I'd appreciate it if you left a like and considered subscribing to the channel if you're new. And other than that, thanks for watching, and have a great rest of your day, everyone.